Okay, so thank you so much. And we have a few superintendents from surrounding counties, if they'd be willing to just take a turn and stand up and let us know where you're from. Starting to my right over here,
Robert Wheeler, Elbert County.
Derek Austin, Putnam County.
Jody Goodrose, Madison County. Matt Lawrence, Social City. Chip Underwood, Walton County Schools.
Dale Simpson, Foothills Regional High School.
anybody? I know Dr. Brown is going to be some of our testimony.
Joel Brown, Jackson County Schools.
Okay. All right, so that covers us there, and I know Representative Persinger, you and your wife Jenny have done a marvelous job putting this together today, so thank you for hosting us here in Barrow County. I know you'll have some words, but I was going to let the committee members kind of introduce themselves down the line, and if you don't mind closing us out with some local acknowledgments. Representative Dawson?
Representative Robert Dawson. I represent Fulton and Coweta counties.
Representative Mitchell Horner. I represent Catoosa County.
Representative Bethany Ballard, and I represent Houston and Peach counties.
So I'm Representative Paul Persinger, represent District 119. So welcome everyone to District 119. I serve Barrow and Jackson County. I just want to thank everyone in this room. I think had some sort of input or impact to HB 268. It was a lot of work, and I appreciate all the input I got from superintendents, Paige, staff, and especially Dr. Matt Thompson and my wife Jenny Persinger for countless hours of input on that bill. So thank everyone for that.
Well, thank you, Representative Persinger, for all of your hard work on that piece of legislation. I think it is already making a big difference in our state. So with that, Dr. LaDuff, I turn the floor over to you and look forward to hearing from you and your team here in Barrow County. Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
Thank you, Chairman Blackman, and welcome, committee members. We are certainly grateful for the opportunity to host you all here in Barrow County. We've been collaborating with our colleagues across our region and across our state, and we're looking forward to sharing with you today. I just wanted to start the day off by saying thank you for your leadership and for partnering with us and school systems across our state to try to listen and understand the challenges that we face as we try to create better outcomes for our students. So to get us started today, I'm going to have our Deputy Superintendent here in Barrow, Dr. Matt Thompson, to come and get our conversation started.
Good afternoon. It is our pleasure to host you today, and thank you so much for being here, echoing Dr. LaDuff. I just wanted to start out by orienting a little bit about what we're going to be going over today. You'll be hearing from several people in Barrow County Schools Administration, and we wanted to kind of talk about the various subjects. And as Chairman Blackman, as you mentioned, and as Dr. LaDuff did, we obviously suffered an unimaginable tragedy in the 2025 school year in the fall of 2024. And we are so appreciative of the time the legislature took, particularly Representative Persinger, Chairman Irwin, who's not here right now, who put into that bill. And because that bill was so impactful, everyone in the state is trying to figure out how to implement that to make our schools safer. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. We want to talk about the school safety grants that you guys have been so generous to fund, that have done a measurable worth in schools and making us safer. We want to give you all an idea of how a school system uses those funds to make schools safer, and then use that opportunity to talk about how that might work in the future. As I mentioned, HB 268 was a massive bill. It has a lot of different pieces to it, and there's some pieces that as we're trying to implement it, we're learning there's ways that maybe we can tweak a little bit that will reduce a little bit of the pressure on school administrators, but will also keep us safe. And we want to kind of highlight a few of those areas that we think might be helpful. We want to talk a little bit about the return to work bills, which I know several of you have worked very hard on and we're appreciative of, and how we think those bills would help us as school administrators, district administrators going forward. We're going to talk a little bit more about health insurance for teachers, and then finally talk a little bit about mandated lessons for students and how the compounding effect of those can be challenging, and some ideas about how in the future that could be handled through legislation. So I'm going to start out by asking our Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, Dr. J.B. Bowen, to come up, and he's going to talk a little bit about the history of safety in Barrow County and how we have tried to approach the issue of keeping our students safe.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Good afternoon, members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
Colleagues, esteemed guests, Board of Education members, welcome to Winder. My name is J.B. Bowen. I'm Assistant Superintendent for Support Services, which includes school counselors, social workers, our healthcare workers, such as nurses and trainers, also student activities, discipline, and behavior supports, but specifically today, here to talk about school safety and security, which I am privileged to speak about and privileged to work in Barrow County. It's my 28th year, 21st in Barrow County. We are incredibly thankful, as Dr. Thompson said, for the safety grants we've received from the state in recent years. We'll talk more about those specific grants in the next several minutes. We're also thankful for the time and effort put into legislation mentioned earlier with Representative Persinger and others that aimed at making our students, staff, and community safer for all. We thank you all for your roles in that endeavor. I'd like to start with a snapshot of the last 25 years safety and security timeline here in Barrow County. I'd like to emphasize just how important each of these areas has been through the years, but also how vital several of these areas and layers were on September 4th, 2024 at Appalachia High School. Beginning in 2000, we started with school resource officers in our schools, and in 2010 entered into an official agreement with SROs through our Sheriff's Department and local county commission. We are currently reworking the next version of that agreement to reflect necessary legislative updates, but also an adjustment in funding at the county commission's request that will drastically increase Barrow County Schools' contribution for this crucial life-saving service. Will this shift in funding be more prevalent in other systems? Who knows? But we do know, what we do know is one of the primary takeaways from last year's tragedy at Appalachia was that our SRO's response that day saved many lives. Other important layers you can see through the years we've added are facility-related enhancements such as auto-locking doors, safety vestibules, also technological advancements, enhancements in layers such as cameras in our schools and updating our security cameras every so often, also updated school bus cameras as well to add to our layers of safety. We have added, by adding these facility enhancements, what we have tried to do there is harden our exterior and also slow down the possibility of any intruders coming into our buildings. The second crucial takeaway after SROs that we have gleaned now in reflection of September 4th was the strategic system, which everyone is probably pretty familiar with that, but it undoubtedly saved many lives that day because of the speed in which the alerts were sent out to notify both students and staff to go through what we have practiced many times, which is our intruder alerts we've practiced for 20 plus years. That alert that came through the strategic system allowed for the speed and quickness to go into that drill mode, which we practice as drills, but to go into that mode, but also it notified our emergency response through a 911 notification. The speed in which they responded, they being Barrow County Fire, Barrow County Sheriff's Department, and our local EMA, saved numerous lives with their both speed and also their skill. Staying in that same area, I would point to our full-scale exercise completed in March 2024, which was done at one of our schools in Barrow County, a different school than Appalachia. However, by bringing all the local agencies together to plan and implement that full-scale exercise, to prepare for something that you hope never happens, but actually did happen 6 short months later. That remarkable teamwork and collaboration required to plan and implement all that was truly amazing and a model for all. And our people are now being asked to go to other systems to help advise and consult as more and more start doing full-scale exercises of their own. In the aftermath of September 4th, we have done several things as well. We've added more SRO positions. We've added weapons detection systems. All of our middle school and high schools have weapons detection scanning that goes on every morning, every student, every day. That is done at each middle and high school now. Those investments and those layers obviously are very expensive, but it reflects our commitment and our board's commitment to our focus on safety. Again, thankful for the funds that these legislators and the governor have helped us offset local expenses to add all of these layers. Some other things I'll go through. We have updated our emergency preparedness procedures. This is in the form of a manual that we've replaced this year, one in every classroom. These manuals outline procedures for safety risks, everything from gas leaks to severe weather, bomb threats to trespassers or intruders. There's even a procedure for an earthquake. As you can imagine, September 4th has caused us all to look at all our procedures and our preparedness very closely. We made some changes. We wanted our new procedures to reflect those changes. We also have an app now in which we can place our operational plan on an app for anyone who wants to use that, complete with fillable forms that not only serve as a guide during an emergency, but also a documentation of steps that were taken throughout the response to the threat. To bring up Centegix again, one of the programs within Centegix is a safety blueprint, which allows us to complete a mapping project. And that project is going to help us not only to update room numbers, hall numbers, to have a universal naming system in all of our schools, but what that does is allow for emergency response. As they come into a school building, they'll have access to this mapping, and they'll be able to not only find certain rooms and locate certain areas logistically in the building, we also have a lot of assets that are going to be mapped in case that they're needed there too, such as stop the bleed kits, water cutoffs, electrical cutoffs, and there's about 12 different assets that we're going to have labeled in every single school across our district. That is currently happening now and should be done within the month. Another product and offer from Centegix that is going to be crucial to our safety plan. We have added a new anonymous reporting system. We've had one for several years. We updated and went to a better product. We think that we're about to roll out live to everyone now. They'll allow people to report all sorts of concerns. We will channel those to the appropriate people with an appropriate response, whether that is a school-based response, district-based, whether it's an actual threat, or whether it is simply concerns. As you might imagine, we get all sorts of things reported through those reporting systems, but we get them in the right hands and manage those accordingly. The last thing that I would identify there as a layer is that we have added a school dog app. This was developed by our friend Buddy Cosley, a former superintendent. What our SROs and administration are able to do is use this digital platform to be able to enter data from safety walks. And during these safety walks, they're looking for both tools, they're looking for facility-based items that make us safer, but they're also looking for the human element as well, and how diligent we are in making sure that doors are locked, making sure that locks are working properly, and also just observing the general security feeling in the building. It allows for a lot of things to be observed there and entered into a platform that then we can run reports off of and use it primarily, as Buddy says, as a praise tool to affirm the good things going on. There may be a few things we find we want to address as well. All of these layers and all these safety tools have certainly made Barrow County Schools a safer place. They became possible in large part due to the safety funds and grants that we have received. Again, we're thankful for that. I want to invite Ms. Jennifer Houston, our Chief Financial Officer, to come forward now and speak specifically about these grants and amounts and how they were used. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bowen.
All right, this wouldn't be a study committee meeting on state mandates without someone like me coming forward and to discuss the financial impact of those mandates at the local level. I appreciate the opportunity to share how the state support has made a real difference in Barrow County and where we still face challenges. Above all, I want to begin by expressing our sincere appreciation for every dollar the state of Georgia has invested in Barrow County schools. These funds are more than just line items. They represent direct investment in safety, well-being, and future of our students and staff. Our local taxpayers are grateful as well. Every dollar we receive from the state reduces the burden on property owners and allows us to stretch our local resources a little farther. And make no mistakes, these funds have saved lives. All right. let me walk you through how your funding has helped us improve safety across the district. In 2019, we received the first batch of safety funds, $116,875. We were able to install access control on all of our exterior doors, install visitor management software where visitors sign in and their backgrounds are checked. We added AEDs to the schools and were able to print and distribute emergency guides for our transportation to have on their buses. During this same grant period, the state authorized additional funds. Barrow County School System received $450,000, which helped us continue the 2 projects of access control and the visitor management in the schools. We purchased additional AEDs and also installed about $120,000 worth of security cameras. In 2023, the state of Georgia allocated $50,000 per school, and we were able to purchase the Centegix Panic Alert System with some help from the Sheriff's School Zone camera funds. As you all know, this is a critical life-saving tool that you help fund. Then in 2025, the state authorized $47,000 per school, and we purchased the weapons detectors and installed a phone in every classroom. In March of 2025, the state amended the fiscal year 2025 budget and announced an additional $21,635 per school. The governor and our legislators also approved $47,165 per school in the fiscal year 2026 budget. With these funds, we are currently looking to upgrade our access control. It's been 6 years, and that technology is going out of date and is not supported anymore. We are always looking at more cameras. We need to update our speakers and sound systems in the gyms and cafeterias so the students and teachers can hear warnings, if any. And we have many other items on our list. We are deeply appreciative of these funds. $3.3 million over the past 8 years has been given to Barrow County School System. However, there are 2 areas of concern: the lack of predictability and consistency, and the timing of the notification of the allocations. These grants are not guaranteed year to year, making it nearly impossible to plan long term. For example, Centegix is a 5-year contract. What happens in year 6? Access control systems require annual subscriptions and fees. Security cameras and software need ongoing maintenance and upgrades. Once we purchase the safety infrastructure, we have to find local funds to keep that infrastructure up to date, and it adds to our budget. The lack of consistency and predictability means we could not use these funds for people. We would always have to buy things. If we had a predictable stream of safety funds, we could use these funds for a portion of our school resource officers. Over the past few years, our costs have been about $600,000 per year. This year, we are looking at over $1 million, and next year, over $2 million. Do we want to do something about this? Or?
I was wondering if that was...
Okay. Should I just keep on going?
I think so. I think so.
Another issue we have is timing of allocations. We often receive notice after most of our budget has been finalized. As a result, we are reacting rather than strategically planning for sustainable improvements. We know that our school system should not rely on state for all of our safety needs. We know we have to use a portion of our local funds for the safety of our schools. But as you all know, those safety needs and requests are only increasing. Safety has become more complicated and critical. We, like every school district, are spending like every other school district, are spending more on it. The grants have helped immeasurably, but they may need to change as all the districts in the state start to follow the requirements of House Bill 268. Again, we are so appreciative of the funds you provide to us. Here's a list of some of the items that we currently pay for with our local funds or are looking at grants to pay for. School resource officers, cameras, mental health reimbursements, security vestibules, AEDs, security at events, access control enhancements, safety and security officers and staff, including parking lot assistance, audio enhancements, which is our camera subscriptions, communications platforms, safety applications, emergency preparedness manuals, vehicle and mobile trailers for security, and vehicle tag readers. Although the current grants will allow us to address some of these needs, the lack of consistency, annual funding makes it difficult to strategically plan for long-term improvements and sustainability. If we had assurance that security funding would be available each year, we could make smarter, more cost-effective decisions, prioritizing projects, scheduling system upgrades, and budgeting for ongoing maintenance and licensing fees in a proactive rather than reactive manner. We respectfully request the General Assembly consider creating a categorical grant for school safety and security, similar to what is already done for transportation and school nurses. This would allow us to incorporate funding into annual planning, sustain and upgrade safety systems as needed, reduce reliance on local taxes for state-mandated security requirements. We are grateful for the state support and truly recognize how it has saved lives and improved outcomes. With greater predictability and fairness, we can ensure safer, higher quality education for every child in Barrow County without putting unsustainable pressure on local taxpayers. Thank you. And now we're going to call up Dr. Adam, or Dr. Thompson's coming back up.
Dallas has already been up. Yeah, he just got introduced.
Consider continuing the conversation. And welcome, Chairman Irwin. We're so glad you're here because one of the things I was about to do was to talk about with HB 268 with both yourself and Representative Persinger and others, how open you guys were to feedback from superintendents around the state, from Barrow County. We immeasurably appreciate that. So thank you for that. The bill was better for it. And I can tell you, given that it was our incident that led to this legislation, how important it was to us and how proud we are that that ended up doing some things that we think will make the state, the students of our state, much safer at school, and so we appreciate all that work. As with any very large piece of legislation that has to get put out, there are always things that as we go through implementation, and all the superintendents that are represented here are currently working with their staff to implement 268, we're learning things as we do that that may be challenging, and one of the things we want to do, since this is about prioritizing mandates, reducing mandates, is to give very concrete feedback about ways in which we think as we implement 268, there may be tweaks that could be made during the next legislative session or subsequent ones that we think would both balance the needs for safety but also make it easier to administer these for teachers, social workers, counselors, school administrators, and so on, and particularly in three areas: timelines for student records, official encounters from law enforcement agencies, and the withdrawal to limit education clause. And for each of these, we're going to try to give very practical ideas that we have in these areas. One of the biggest things HB 268 did was it really changed the timeline on which student records are transferred. And that is not only a safety issue, which it clearly was in our specific instance because there were aspects that we were not aware of because records were not transferring, but more additionally, that is just a normal support students need. I used to be for 8 years over student records in Barrow County, and I can't tell you the number of times we would have a student that we knew for a fact was special education, but we may have to wait multiple weeks to get that student's IEP to know how to serve them. That was a not uncommon occurrence. We were an early adopter on electronic records. We went to electronic record keeping in 2014, and slowly a lot of districts in the state have moved on that, and most districts do a fantastic job with records, but there are always those that we struggle to get, and we can't serve kids if we don't have their records, which creates both a safety issue but also just a service issue. So we love the fact that HB 268, even though it has been challenging for all districts to implement this, has made that investment in. It is, our students' records need to transfer quickly. What we have learned, though, is there's a lot of confusion around the state around what HB 268 actually mandates in terms of numbers of days. And I've got this table up here, what I'm calling the Rule of Five, which is in pretty much every instance in HB 268, and there's a whole lot of them, it goes through specifically which records have to go, and it is always some variation: 5 business days, 5 days, 5 school business days, except for the transition of records between school districts and a parent's request to have a copy of their records, which is 3 business days. That has created a tremendous amount of confusion. I have sat through any number of professional learnings around the state where people are citing that it is 5 days that you have when a student moves into Barrow County from another county in Georgia, when actually our reading of the law is it is 3, and other people read the same law and say it is 5. And there is a lot of confusion. 3 days is also extremely challenging. Every school has a records clerk, somebody who's a data clerk or a registrar whose job it is to make sure that transitions. Think about how they do work. They have to workflow their activity. They're probably not going to transfer that the first day they get a request. They're backed up. They go day 2 or 3. That person gets sick. They're out for a day. You got to have a backup. Suddenly you're out of compliance with that over a single day. 3 is very aggressive. 5 is aggressive. Before this was tweaked, it was 10 was the maximum amount of time that could be between a transfer between school districts. What we're suggesting in this particular case would be to change to move that to universally 5 days and more universally 5 school business days, because there is a lot of confusion about business days, school business days. Is a business day, it's not a school business day, is that a day when the school system's open but there's not kids there? It's not always clearly defined. We think moving to a universal standard of 5 days for every record exchange, regardless of what that may look like, reduces confusion. It adds a little time for schools to be able to make those critical transfer of records. We think moving to a standard of 5 universally would go a long way to do that, while still setting the expectation, which districts across the state are taking up to, that they need to get records transitioned more quickly. So we think that would be a way to alleviate some of that confusion and also take a little bit of work off the school data clerks and records clerks. The next piece we wanted to talk about was withdrawal to limit education. Under HB 268, if a student has not been enrolled for 30 consecutive days, and that student has not enrolled in another public or private school, and who has not signed an affidavit with the state that they will be homeschooling, we are required to make a referral to the Department of Family and Child Services. That used to be 45 days, and that was based on an incident in 2018 in Effingham County, a very awful incident. Part of what challenges with this, and we understand completely this is a critical task, but the thing that typically happens when we do this, when students leave us, they go to somewhere. They disappear. Typically, parents don't come in and withdraw. They don't come in and say, I'm withdrawing my kid. They just stop attending. Currently, state board rule says that after a student has been absent for 10 consecutive days, we are to drop them from their roles, and that comes from QBE. In order to count for funding, you have to be in present one of the prior 10 days. So the current state board rule, which the State Department of Education has not removed, is that after 10 consecutive absences, we drop them. There's other places in the law, both in terms of, this is from 785, this actually I think came from SB 123, which says in the event a student does not for a period of 30 consecutive days enter the public school, certain things have to happen. And then additionally, there's another clause in there that says no student shall be expelled solely due to child absences. There's not a lot of clarity right now out there in terms of when we're allowed to drop a student to begin with. So we're not sure if after 10 days we're supposed to withdraw them, after 30. We're very much in need of guidance in this particular area. But what frequently happens is, regardless, a student withdraws and leaves us. This is an example of every time a student leaves a school, they are given a code. When a student leaves, it is typically an unknown code. Then, say, another school district will accept them. They'll ask for records. We'll change that to whatever that code is. But inevitably, we have, this is Barrow County over the last few years, between every year 130 to 200 kids we just can't track down. We don't know where they go. They may go out of state into a homeschool consortium that doesn't request records. They may leave the country. They may just drop off the map, but we don't know where these kids go, and we typically lack the resources to be able to track them down. And we have incentive to, because if they're high school, these kids count against our grad rate, so we do a lot of work to try to track these kids down, but generally speaking, they frequently fall off the map. When we make a referral to the Department of Family and Child Services, they are required by law to take that, but typically they themselves lack the resources to actually investigate these. There are jurisdictional issues between states. What we want to say is this is an important issue, and obviously no piece of legislation can solve every single problem on earth, particularly things that stand outside of the scope of Georgia law. But currently we're required to make these referrals, track these students after 30 days, and typically what happens is DFACS may be able to track them down, particularly if they have an open case on them, but often nothing actually comes about that. This is not something school districts can actually affect all that much, other than just making sure we follow the law. Our thinking here is if this this is an issue the state wants to take on, and given the fact that many families that have kids going through mental health issues that may be a threat to themselves or others will frequently get in trouble at school, and sometimes parents will just remove them to limit education, it's going to take a little more than what we have currently in the law to be able to manage that. Because currently we don't see a lot of return on that, and that's not to say anything bad about our partners at DFACS. It's simply to express the reality that when those referrals get made, that very frequently does not turn into any kind of action that we can have. So our recommendation there is to look at possible other areas that could be looked at to see what can we actually do for those kids whose families just pull them completely off the map and they're just remaining on our books as an unknown, because that is not good for them and it's certainly not good for us. The third area is official encounters. Obviously, with the September 4th incident, we had a situation where there had been some law enforcement contact that had not been reported on. So HB 268 puts a lot in there that when law enforcement agencies have an official encounter, they have to make a report of that within 5 days to the local school district. I can only speak to Barrow County's experience with this, but since August 1st, we have had a total of 81 official encounters reported, all the way from students as young as 7 all the way up to 17. Only about 7 of those have actually resulted in charges. Many of these are students who are 7, 8 years old, saying very, very dumb things, and that doesn't mean we don't take them seriously, but they are saying these words. Law enforcement has to. They are sworn to investigate those situations. We have to then take a report of them. We're not sure at this point whether or not we have to send that record along with that student should they transfer. We're not quite sure if that becomes part of the student's critical records. Every law enforcement jurisdiction and every Board of Education is currently handling that a little bit differently. So we are being very careful to make sure that every official encounter we get, that will follow the student if they were to transfer. But in some cases, that goes back to a problem that came up during some of the hearing, which is things following students that parents may be uncomfortable with. That's a real challenge. And additionally, we're getting these for students that maybe have limited cognitive ability, things of that nature. We also have some challenges with things like would be enrolled by virtue of, which typically refers to the fact the student may live in Barrow County, they may be going to private school in another county. And we're not sure if law enforcement investigates that in Gwinnett County, do they know to make a report to us or they make that to Gwinnett County? Our thinking here is there's 2 basic approaches we would probably suggest y'all take a look at. One of them is it already is in the law to revisit the emergency alert response system. I know there was a lot of consternation, bipartisan, and I totally understand that. When I'm a parent as well. I would not want records following my kid for their entire life if I thought those were unfair. But one of the things in listening to all of those hearings is there was a large misunderstanding about what already is records. There were parents concerned that my kid's discipline record is going to follow them to other schools. That already happens by law if they're older than a certain grade level, regardless. There were parents that were concerned about, well, my kid had an ugly incident with a principal. That wouldn't be a threat. That would just be misbehavior. That's discipline. That automatically does get transferred with the student. That's just the reality of the law and schools as it is right now. It is in there. We think taking that out of schools and law enforcement's hands and putting it in some agency like GMA or something equivalent would be extremely helpful to making these official encounters standardized, making sure they transfer and making sure they're transparent and available, because currently we're all trying to do our best, but it's a little bit challenging. Failing that, the other thing we think to look at would be some clarification on whether or not official encounters are part of a student's critical record. Do they have to transfer? Setting expectations that they would transfer, but also potentially looking at things like raising the minimum age that would be required for a report, potentially like 10 or 12 instead of 6, or alternatively looking at things like cognitive ability as a factor. We think all those things balance and make this much more manageable while keeping our schools safe. So I'm going to end my part by saying that I am so appreciative of the work that was done on this bill. We think it makes schools safer. We just want to refine that as we go forward to make it something sustainable that will enable us to keep our schools safe going forward. We're going to segue now off of safety, and I'm going to ask Dr. Adam Kurtz to come up and talk about an issue that I know is near and dear to many of you, which is return to work and why that is important.
Dr. Kurtz, before you
begin, if you don't mind. I don't think he needs any introduction, but Chairman Irwin has joined us. Everybody
And I
else.
apologize for being late around here, sorry.
We knew you had challenges to be here this afternoon, and I'm a little remiss. Dr. Scott from Clark County, I know we had some introductions earlier, but another superintendent's with us. Thank you, Dr. Kurtz.
Thank you, and thank you all for sharing your time, wisdom, and passion with us this afternoon as we think about what we can do to continue to move our supports for students and their learning forward. As you've heard from a number of folks, there are a lot of challenges that our schools have. Our teachers are working hard, not just at teaching math, teaching writing, teaching reading, but keeping our kids safe, worrying about their emotional health, all of those things. And as they work hard, we want to have the best teachers in front of our kids. The good news is, in the end, my ask is that you continue the work that you started this last session. So it's a pretty easy ask. We already have House Bill 385 that has allowed some educators to return to work. Since 2022, educators who had retired with 30 years of creditable TRS experience, who had sat out of education for 1 year, had 1 year of separation from the education field, have been allowed to return to work. And most of the folks in our RESA have been using that to some extent to get some folks back into their schools and in their districts. One of the limiting factors, additional limiting factor, is that there are 3 areas identified. They're identified by Godot and PSC based on 5-year historical data for the high needs, and they're identified by RESA district. And so that's been a limiting factor. Here it's generally been, it was originally science, special ed, and mathematics, and now science fell off recently, causing us a little bit of heartache, but I think our new legislation proposed addresses that and could help us move forward with those pieces. Right now, our challenges in staffing are, as we mentioned, teachers have more to do than they did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. They have very important jobs, and we currently have high employment. That's a great problem as a nation, that most of the people that want jobs have them. It's hard when we're looking for good educators. For the last 20 or so months, we've been just above 4% unemployment. Prior to June of 23, we've been just below 4%, so in the 3% range unemployment. Bureau of Labor Statistics sets full employment somewhere between 4 and 6%, depending on a number of other factors. But in short, what these numbers mean is those folks that want jobs have jobs. There are more jobs out there than there are people looking for them, and that makes it hard for us to find teachers. Additionally, in education, we have a fairly high cost of entry. Not only do you have to have a college degree, you have to have a fairly specific college degree that results in teacher certification of some kind and a limiting certification. That certification, if it's in health and PE, doesn't allow you to teach much besides health and PE. So it takes a big upfront commitment that some other industries don't take, which further limits our candidate pools. And then finally, we have some inflationary factors that cause some additional burden. If we look at a decade ago, in July of 2015, if we grab the state salary schedules from then and just inflation adjust our state salary schedules, on average, our teachers have fallen behind by 11% in real dollars, or a little below $7,500 in take-home. Now, at the high end, those with the more experience and advanced degrees are more than 17% behind in actual take-home dollars, or $14,500 less if we just inflation adjusted those dollars. Now, local districts and boards have picked a lot of that up to try to make up that difference, and in the end, this ask is also going to include the ask that you, as more and more of that funding burden is shifted to local boards, that you shift more and more of the both responsibility but also the control to local boards to make decisions about who they need to return to work. Finally, benefits. State health benefit plan used to be a great draw for educators. The cost has gone up for both employers and employees. Employers are paying $1,885 a month, or $22,620 a year for our portion of health insurance costs. That doesn't necessarily slow our employees down from applying, but their costs have gone up. This year, most of the plans have gone up by about $80. But at the higher end, the employee costs the average employee cost on the individual plans is $157 a month, or a little under $1,900 for a year. But if they are going for the average, if a beginning teacher is going for the average cost family plan, it costs them $6,624 a year, or almost 1 in every 5 of their take-home dollars is going to their health insurance premiums for their family. Additionally, the health insurance provided with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act is very similar to what's available with other industries at a lower cost. So it's no longer a tool that we're able to use to effectively draw folks and keep folks into education. So our key needs in the legislation that we're looking at that will move us beyond House Bill 385 would be limited separation. We lose folks to other industries, even other states. When I surveyed our RESA, the 14 districts, several of those that had people return, the folks that left spent 1 year of separation teaching in South Carolina. Folks are going to find another job. They're going to be busy. They're passionate about making a difference for kids. Once they find that job, it's a little harder for us to hook them back. I'm glad we're able to draw folks over South Carolina, but we want to be able to have them return as quickly as possible so that we don't lose folks to other industries altogether, lose some of our most experienced and most effective educators. When we looked, we had 39 certified vacancies. I looked late last week in this RESA. Of those, there are 18 different areas of certification, many counties having multiple. So the greater flexibility that we can have in identifying areas of need, the better. The current system, where it uses 5 years of data that Godot and PSC put together to try to identify those, is a little bit limiting, because while we might have most openings in special education, one school psychologist or one ag teacher out of 2 being unfilled makes a huge difference, an insurmountable difference. It destroys programs. And so having the greatest flexibility we can in which areas return would be helpful. And predictability, I want to thank Representative Ballard. I think in a page news alert there with Ms. Ciccarelli and others, she indicated that there was an intention to try to pass legislation early in the session. That really is helpful. We are planning right now for next year. For us to have a great next year, we've got to start today. And so the sooner that we can get that information, I think it was mentioned as early as February, and trying to get a quick governor signing, and that is very much appreciated. Anything along those lines helps us to plan, helps us to make a difference, get the best of the best in front of our kids as early as possible. Also, extending the program well into the future helps with those things, and so that should be considered as well. So not just predictability for the 26-27 school year, but for several years to come. And then finally, flexibility on credibility of experience. As we look, I want to say it was the TRS folks were saying that in general, the average retiree is just over 25 years. And so if we look at something with less than 30 years of credible experience, will allow more folks who are retired but still have some good years to give our kids and our communities, have the opportunity for them to return. Our current proposals, House Bill 372 does quite a few of these things. It does allow for greater flexibility in positions. We're thankful for that. It extends the year up to 2030. And then, as I said earlier, trying to get that passed by February, while it's not specifically written into the legislation, is something that I think we can all get behind and really appreciate. Yeah, well, and it really demonstrates your understanding of what we're trying to do, because having it passed late in the session does make it difficult for us to use it as effectively as possible. Kind of delayed the start of 385. The good news is the PSC, State Health, and everybody, I think we have the rules worked out on what this would look like, so I think we can move a whole lot faster, even if it doesn't pass by by February, but I love that February date. And then Senate Bill 150 does minimize the separation to 60 days, which we think is something that could be helpful, keep us from losing folks to other industries, and it also reduces those credible years' experience. So the challenge moving forward is keep this legislation going as much as you can. Give us some local control and maximum flexibility, because while we might identify some areas through the numbers that we definitely need, there are other areas that won't show up in the numbers until we need them. And I guess there's one other piece I want to say that I hope is kept in any legislation, and that is, and Ms. Ballard brought this up in that same presentation, and that is that no one who's hired under this provision would lose their job by identifying new areas of eligibility. I think we've run into a little bit of that in our RESA, and have had some challenges in working around. So moving forward, we would hope that you continue with these pieces of legislation with maximum flexibility and as early adoption as possible. Now, as we look at state health funding and those kinds of things, Ms. Houston's going to come talk a little further about that.
All right, one of Barrow County's most pressing unfunded mandates is the rising cost of health insurance for our classified, our non-certified staff, and that's the employer portion. While the QBE funding formula covers health insurance for certified staff, our teachers, the non-certified staff costs must be absorbed locally through the general fund, which is supported by local property taxes, or through school nutrition revenues for our cafeteria workers. This burden currently costs Barrow County School System approximately $12.3 million annually, forcing us to consider outsourcing our staff positions, a practice that leads to less training, higher turnover, weaker accountability, and therefore inconsistent service quality. Georgia currently maintains 3 separate state health plans. The state employee plan, the contribution rate is 29.454% of total salaries. There's the teacher plan, and it's a flat rate, like Dr. Kurt said, of $22,620 per enrolled member annually. And then we have the public school employee plan. We're going to call that the PSEP plan. It's also $22,620 annually per enrolled member. This is the plan that we are focusing on because obviously this plan is costing us a large amount of resources. The PSEP covers bus drivers, paraprofessionals, school food nutrition workers, custodians, maintenance, technology, and clerical staff. Per Regulation 111-4-1, the Board of Community Health can set employer contribution rates by flat amount, percentage of salaries, or other legal methods, subject to the governor's approval. This is how the employer rates have increased over the years. There has been an 100% increase from 2022 to 2026, which is significantly impacting local school systems and increasing the financial obligation of the state towards our certified staff also. For context, the health insurance cost now exceeds the base salary for many of our lowest paid employees. A starting bus driver, 107% of their salaries is paid out in health care. Cafeteria workers is 155%, and a parapro 102%. This is unsustainable and places enormous pressure on our ability to recruit, retain, and fairly compensate essential support staff, leading to outsourcing many of these positions. We respectfully request your office to study and consider more sustainable models of funding for our public school employee plan, such as adopting a percentage of payroll method similar to the state employee plan that's currently 29.45% of salaries. It would be more equitable relative to the salary levels. Or introducing a tiered contribution rate. Base these rates on coverage level, for example, individual versus family. Individual plans could be assessed a lower employer contribution. We understand that full access to the state health benefit plan cost data is limited. However, we ask your offices to initiate a comprehensive study into these issues to identify equitable and fiscally responsible solutions for school systems and the employees who support our students every day. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Thompson. Yes.
All too familiar with the health insurance part as a small business person myself. Are you limited as to what, and obviously, as they rise up above the salaries, that's a limiting factor, but are you limited what you can collect from the employee? I don't know the answer to that question.
We are limited, yes. The state health tells us exactly what we can collect from
What
the
you can and
employee.
can't, okay. Thank you.
And many times, people ask, can we go to another plan? Could we go ask United Healthcare or Blue Cross Blue Shield to bid on us? But once we leave the plan, we can't come back. And so sometimes they'll give us a lower rate to get our business, and then they'll up the rates later, and we'll never be able to come back to the state health plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I get to bring our portion of the presentation home with one final item. And as we reflected on the purpose of this committee, which is reducing and prioritizing mandates of education, I think this one is one that is both a specific issue we want to make you aware of, but also sort of philosophically shows some of the challenges that legislation can present to school systems as we try to comply. So what I'm going to show you is how compounding effects of very good laws can still put a lot of burden on school staff. So this is an example of 5 different what we'll call guidance lessons. Some of these came out of HB 268 just this last year. I think the oldest of these goes back to around 2013. So all of these were put in place in various pieces of legislation over the past 12 or so years. And each of these deals with a very timely and important topic that has to be taught to students in varying grade levels. So Aaron's Law, which deals with childhood sexual abuse, is K through 8. Suicide prevention, human trafficking, violence prevention are 6 through 12. The Bridge Top State for Talent Law is basically, that's a law that's been on the books since about 2012 or 13 that looks at preparing students for what comes next when they graduate, career awareness, youth science, all that stuff, learning about themselves. All of these are good things. All of these are great things. And every one of these laws require that an hour to 2 hours be given to any given student over the course of a year. That's great. That's wonderful. And in each of these cases, a free option was offered by the Georgia Department of Education or other agencies to help us fill that. Haven't really had to put a lot of money towards these things, so these are good. This is an example of good legislation. But what it can do when we're not looking backwards at all the other things that are already in place is it can put strain. Because even though teachers are fully capable of guiding many of these lessons, many teachers are uncomfortable having these conversations. So what inevitably happens in our systems, and I think it probably happens in a lot of systems, this falls on the counselors. This falls on the guidance counselor. And so even though a particular classroom may only have an hour that has to be done, you may find that your school counselor has to do this same hour-long lesson with every single classroom in your entire school, be that 6 through 8, 9 through 12. And our counselors, more is being asked of than ever before. This is from the Georgia Student Health Survey or the Climate Survey. This is Barrow County results, but I think all of the committee is aware of the challenges of anxiety and depression among adolescents. About 1 out of every 4 Barrow County high schoolers and middle schoolers last year reported that they felt sad or worried either every day or multiple times per week, which would be a symptom of clinical depression, if not clinical depression itself. About 4 out of every 10 students in Barrow County reported that every single day or at least multiple times per week they felt anxious. We have a crisis, and that's why I think things like HB 340 that look at reducing the impact of things like social media in the classroom, SB 351 from the year before that looks at that, that's why they're so critical. Our kids are saturated with comparisons to other kids, things that create and induce mental health issues for them. But those are all things that your social workers, your counselors are now having to deal with that they were not having to do 15, 20 years ago. This is an example of suicide assessments in Barrow County. These are the number of suicide assessments our counselors and social workers have had to deal with over the past 5 to 8 years. In SY 2017, we had a total of 65. And by the way, to have a suicide assessment, that is a student who has a coherent plan of suicide that usually involves calling in the crisis network to try to support them. That typically ends up being a very large endeavor. We went from 65 in 2017 to in 2025, we had 239. That is basically 1 per day on average. So our counselors, our social workers are being asked more and more and more to work with students on mental health issues in ways they were not being asked just 10 or 15 years ago. We have state board rules in place that require that a certain number of their segments per day have to be done counseling, which doing mental health interventions is typically not considered part of that. They're not clinicians, they're counselors, but also teaching lessons in classes sometimes might not be considered that as well. What this does is it creates a cascade effect. All of these in and of themselves are really good things, but when you put them in bill after bill over multiple and multiple years, you create a cascade where suddenly you've created so many mandates that ultimately their time is being taken up by compliance with those pieces for good things, but ultimately it's preventing them from being able to do the core work they're actually hired to do. What our ask would be here, what our suggestion would be here is sometimes to look retrospectively. Could some of these lessons be folded into other lessons that already exist? Could there be potentially things that could do multiple things at the same time? Do we need to remove some of the older things in there? When we were doing some study for this, we found so many older pieces of legislation that really no one is even doing or following anymore, and they sit on the books. And I can say, I don't think many districts are doing this. I can't guarantee there's not some district somewhere still trying to comply with the law that 90% of the state gave up on 20 years ago, because it just doesn't matter at this point. So one of the things that we think would be extremely helpful is, as you think about legislation and putting that on there, thinking about capacity, don't just think about that's a great idea for this particular bill, because it will be. Those are all wonderful causes. Those are lessons that are badly needed for those students. But the cumulative effect of death by 1,000 cuts in there is challenging for our folks. So it's just an encouragement, not just on this issue, but to look retrospectively, not just prospectively on those, because all of those were worthwhile things doing, and all those create challenges for us when we try to staff. So that's just something to throw out there for you all to think about. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. LaDuff to bring our section to a close. But on behalf of myself, I just want to thank you guys for listening. I want to thank you guys for all you do for Barrow County Schools, for every school system in this state. You are appreciated.
And, I appreciate your comments and the way you handled that, but what you are targeting is exactly what I think this committee and Chairman Irwin has saw this committee doing. So obviously Representative Persinger has done his job in bringing you all together on this. So thank you very much, Dr. LaDuff. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, thank you. And again, I want to thank the committee for their work. It is not easy to serve as an elected official in any capacity, and typically all you hear are all the bad news. What we've tried to do here today is demonstrate what's worked well for us as well, and how we might continue to build upon those things and improve, because ultimately we are all here for students, and it will take all of us to get the very best outcomes for our students. So thank the committee for their proactive approach to seeking out how we might be able to partner together to create those outcomes for our students. At this time, I'm going to welcome the Executive Director of the Northeast Georgia RESA, Ms. Lori Allison, to the podium to continue to share some thoughts with us.
Thank you for being here too, Ms. Allison. And I assume, Dr. LaDuff, we can get a copy of this presentation. We'll have yes, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Allison, the Executive Director for Northeast Georgia RESA, and I'm privileged to be here today to talk with you about things that affect and impact our region. And I first wanted to thank you for having the listening ear and the foresight to think about how we could streamline and work together to help legislation that's positive legislation have a great impact on the educators that we're serving. So I appreciate your time today. One thing that I wanted to make sure to mention to you is that we have more in common, I believe, than we do in differences. I think that we all could agree that we want students to learn well at a high level. We want quality instruction. We want safe schools, and we want to be able to support the needs of the families of the children that we're serving. And so we all agree upon that, and we have a common need there. Where we sometimes get into somewhat of a little bit of strife is really related to getting down into the weeds of some of the specific parts of the legislation. And so we could think about ways that we might be able to think of the general overview and the big topic of what we agree on, and sometimes maybe stay out of the weeds to a certain degree. And as I was thinking of this today, it reminded me, now many of you in here are too young to remember this, but there was a time in this state of Georgia where we didn't have to use seat belts. I don't know if there anybody in here who remembers that time frame? Okay. And there was state legislation that was passed for seat belts. And I have a father who was in the automobile industry. And so the reason it was relevant to me is I can recall a time when the seatbelt laws passed in the late 80s, and some friends asking my father, "What did you think of that legislation?" And he said, Well, I'm all right about keeping people safe as long as they don't start telling us how to build cars in the Capitol. So I was thinking about from that standpoint, we all want the same thing. We want safety, we want good instruction, but how can we work together to make sure we're not so far down into the weeds that it actually can become a hindrance, that we could work together for some solutions. I wanted to share with you an example of something that particularly worked well and then we're so grateful for from the RESA perspective, and that is with the literacy initiatives that you have supported. We were phenomenally blessed by the fact that you set the expectation of what you wanted to see in Georgia schools for literacy, that you were able to say what you wanted to see in support for the teachers in the classroom, and then you allowed RESA to receive the funding for that, but you also trusted us to be able to implement that in the way that we saw best. We were able to design a plan that was then approved in order to make that happen. And so you didn't get down into the nitty-gritty part of the weeds, but you set that expectation level, and it worked tremendously, and it's really a big success supporting teachers in classrooms across the state. And so I wanted to put a plug in there to thank you for that and tell you that that approach really made the difference for our schools. I wanted to share with you, this is just a little map to show the region that we support in our RESA. We're proud to have 14 phenomenal school systems and superintendents that we're serving from our RESA. And, you know, we've talked some about the challenges that face educators and the shortage of leadership, and as well as the turnover in superintendency. And one thing I wanted you to think of, we've heard numbers such as more than 60 superintendents that have had turnover in the state this year. I wanted you to realize that in our little region of 14 districts, we have 10 of 14 superintendents with 1 year or less of experience. And they have hired incredible people to fill these positions, and they're doing a phenomenal job. But that is a huge turnover for us to face in this little small region of the state. I think about the work that they do, the incredible job that they have. It's one of the toughest jobs I think that you could imagine in the world. And they do that with grace, with passion, with grit, and with perseverance, and are able to do what they need to help make schools successful for their district. And I'd love to advocate for flexibility at that local control level for our superintendents, because they are incredible at what they do, and we trust them. And so if you could imagine the group of superintendents in a room planning together and working so hard, they will take a piece of legislation and they'll go line by line and look at every single line and break it down like you'd see a high-profile coach that's breaking down game film. And they'll take it and break it down and look at what needs to happen for them and for their district. But how wonderful would it be if they could take that information and we didn't have to go so far into the weeds, and we had that local control that they could say, I know how to do this. I'm married to a coach, so I use a lot of sports analogies, but I'll tell you, they could decide if they need to use a man-to-man or a zone coverage plan. They can decide that, and they can implement it really well. So it's not always essential that every single one of them has the exact same way to implement. Looking for that local control and flexibility would be really helpful for them. Another area that you could help us with is in the leader pipeline. We've talked about leadership shortage, and that's not just at the superintendent level, but at the principal and the AP level as well. And something that could really make a difference for this is reinstating the ed leader salary schedule for those that are not in the leadership position yet, for teachers to be able to be compensated for that. This is something that's been talked about all across the state in every RESA region. The challenge is that with the positions that we have open, there's not enough to backfill who already have the criteria, the credentials, and the ability to step into that ready to go from day one. And so districts are hiring people that have, they're finding the best candidate they have available, but they're probably coming straight from a classroom without having gotten the leadership certification that they need. And in their initial year, they are working on their leadership certification as like a non-renewable certificate that they have, and going to school year 1 and 2 of their new job that they have just accepted. And so how much better could we have the leaders prepared if we reinstated this and could compensate them for taking the initiative up front to further their education and prepare to be able to serve in those roles? That would be a huge step to help us with the pipeline. The other area that I just wanted to mention, we've highlighted phenomenal things from House Bill 268 that are just a great testament to the work that you've done and a great support to the districts. The one area that's a little bit of a challenge for us that I just wanted to mention from the RESA perspective, and you might not even realize this component, but at RESA's, we serve our school systems. We are a service agency, and our charge is to be a servant, to provide whatever service they need. We're providing professional learning, resources, research, coaching, anything they need. And the board of the 14 school districts that I shared with you, they are our board, and I report to that board. And so unknowingly, at a part of 268, there is a statement there that with the student affairs officer, they actually will be working to try to help with the transition of records. But in the legislation, if they are not successful, the RESA director is to make an attempt. And if I'm not successful, I'm charged by law to report to the state attorney general, the district's failing to do that. And I don't know about you, but not many people, I think, want to be in the role of reporting a supervisor that they work with to the attorney general's office. And so I ask you to think about how can RESA just be looked at as that support. I'm a servant. I would go pick up the records myself if I had to. I'm going to do whatever we need to serve and make sure we get things taken care of for our systems. But I ask for you to please consider revising that so that we're not being asked to report or, it's putting us in a compliance mode where we are supervising and monitoring a process of our own supervisors who hire and evaluate us. So thank you for considering that. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention to you is that I'm so privileged and pleased that Dr. Philip Brown is going to be coming up next to share with you. And as the leader in our RESA, he is the board chair for our Board of Control. And it's amazing to me to see the work that he's done in Jackson County in such a short time. But he is the veteran full-time superintendent in our region with going into his 4th school year. And he is doing an amazing job and has taken it on his own shoulders to be the voice and the voice of support to all of the superintendents in the region. He calls to check on them. He meets with them. He's mentoring and coaching them. He's making sure that our region is successful with all of the transition that we've experienced. And I'm just incredibly proud to work and support him and all of our board. We have incredible superintendents in our region, and I'm thankful to work with them and for them, and appreciate your time today. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Brown.
Thank you, Ms. Allison.
Thank you, Dr. Allison. I'll be honest with you. I'm in my 4th year as school superintendent, and I had to be honest with you. I have no idea what I'm doing. But nobody's ever worked harder at not knowing what they're doing than me. That's my message, and I'm sticking to it. I'm Philip Brown. I have the privilege of being the school superintendent in Jackson County. And I'll tell you, with many of my colleagues in the room right now, there is a significant burden that comes with that responsibility. Knowing that, we all signed up for the job. We all wanted the job. We pursued it. But along with that burden, there's a tremendous opportunity that we have each and every day in America's public schools. I want to begin by acknowledging Dr. LaDuff and our colleagues in Barrow County. Dr. LaDuff faced what every superintendent fears the most. Yet his leadership in guiding this community through such a tragedy has been nothing short of inspiring. What stands out most is his willingness, along with his team of leaders that he works with, to openly share what they've learned so others can benefit. This takes remarkable courage, and it has made all of us stronger as leaders and as Georgia's public schools. As we gather here today, I'm reminded of the importance of conversations like this, opportunities for us to think together, plan together, and work towards strengthening the state that we all love. So thank you all for giving your time and allowing us to be here and talk with you. Thank you to the ones that spoke before me. They highlighted some of the real challenges facing Georgia's schools, and I appreciate their candor. For this portion of the presentation, I want to touch on various challenges facing our public schools. When I think of reducing red tape,
I also think of ways in which other laws could be written to help support the work of Georgia's public schools. I don't think you can look at the laws and the issues that we're facing in isolation. I've often heard it said that if you want to judge a community's priorities, look at its budget and look how it spends its money. By measure, Georgia has clearly prioritized public education. $13.6 billion of our state budget is invested in our K-12 public schools. This is a significant investment, and it has a direct return. Georgia has been recognized as the best state in the nation to do business for 12 years in a row. Yes, tax policy and regulation play a role, but let's not overlook the fact that 90%, almost 90% of the students in Georgia are educated in our public schools. The return on investment made by the legislature and our governor have produced economic growth. We must, as public schools, continue to build partnerships with our local technical colleges. Some staple programs in our community, like agriculture and healthcare science, will continue to be enhanced and expanded as new technologies in these areas arise. Public schools in career, tech, and agriculture education must be flexible enough to pivot as artificial intelligence changes and transforms or eliminates some job fields. Our schools will have to be nimble and forward-thinking to prepare our students for jobs that do not exist today. I think we must think out of the box in hiring, especially when it comes to CTAE. I think we could potentially utilize adjunct roles to help with support some of our trade programs. For example, can we hire somebody practicing HVAC in the private sector to come in and teach one block for us? Our ability to be creative and strategic in our CTA programs will increase our support of economic development in our communities. Schools are, in many ways, mirrors of society, and yet we are a culture, and we live in a culture that's quick to assign blame. At every level of education, people tend to point fingers everywhere. At elementary schools, they blame the parents. At middle schools, they blame the elementary school. At high schools, they blame the middle school. Colleges blame K-12. Too often, public schools end up carrying the weight of every societal challenge. Over the past 50 years, whenever a new issue arises, from Say No to Drugs campaign to internet safety to health and wellness, we add the responsibility and burden onto our public schools. This is definitely not an inclusive list, but just think about this list. Schools are responsible for teaching lessons in basic hygiene, nutrition, making sure our students are immunized, screenings for health, vision, and dental problems, vocational education, student transportation, school lunch programs, foreign language, fire, tornado, and duck and cover drills, driver's education, sex education, bilingual education, career education, special education, drug and alcohol education, behavior adjustment classes, keyboarding and computer education, sexual abuse prevention education, stranger danger education, anti-smoking education, teen pregnancy awareness programs, abstinence education, English as a second language, preschool programs, HIV/AIDS education, bicycle safety and gun safety, Individuals with Disabilities Act, internet safety, bullying education programs, texting and social media etiquette, eating disorder counseling, suicide awareness programs, and intruder lockdown training. If I stood up here today and I told you that we need to get rid of anything on that list, people would say, that's crazy, we need to be teaching kids that. But I think our friends in Barrow highlighted it. It's the cumulative impact of all of those things and all of those mandates that create the challenges. And it's ironic to me that the system that's seen as the solution for so long is often portrayed as the problem. When public schools are unfairly blamed, it erodes the public trust. And right now, we see that trust slipping. And it must be noted, public schools don't get to pick their students. We accept everyone. We all wish for the Dallas LaDuffs and the Chris Irwins, but sometimes we get the Philip Browns and maybe the Ben Wiggins. Every kid and every day is a chance to make a difference. But let's be careful in which ways we compare schools. And I'll give you a real example. Earlier in my career, I taught in South Georgia in a very rural K-12 school. The teachers in that school worked extremely hard and cared deeply about the students and the community. In my last year of teaching at that school, about 70% of my students passed the state math assessment at the end of the year. The next year, I taught in Oconee County in the same grade. I'll be honest, I used the same lessons, used the same strategies, taught it the same way, and at the end of the school year, almost 100% of my students passed the end-of-year math assessment. Same grade, same test. Well, what changed? Did I overnight go from being a C teacher to an A-plus teacher? I don't think so. We have now defined some schools as failing schools. A vast majority of these schools on the failing list also have some of the highest percentages of students receiving free and reduced lunch. In the research world, they would define that as a strong and stable correlation. And I want to say this, I don't have a school on that list. And I'd say the same thing when I was a high school principal, when I had over 100 on the CCRPI. And if you rank the high schools in Georgia, we were usually number one or very close to it. When we assign a single score to schools, I believe it creates an uneven burden on the schools views as failing. It's harder to hire. It's more challenging to entice economic development with business and industry. It leads to a lack of trust between parents and schools. Externally, a school is defined by a single score. Instead of this model, I would recommend a system of accountability that consistently evaluates schools on specific academic achievement criteria. For example, take a group of third graders and track the percentage reading on grade level from third, fourth, fifth, all the way to graduation. This is a system of accountability that makes sense, and people can see the progress that the public school system has made. This would also help motivate our educators and focus on continuous improvement. The three things you have to have for continuous improvement: people have to have a rational understanding of how small improvements compound to big differences. They must love improving, both because they're passionate about the importance of their work and because it feels so good to move to a new level or performance. They must also have enough confidence in their colleagues to believe that the organization is capable of making progress. The system we've adopted is not one that focuses on continuous improvement. I would also note that all institutions and entities receiving state tax dollar funds should be held to the same model of accountability, especially as it relates to the acceptance of students and academic reporting. This would send the message across the state that our leaders are interested on paying attention to a return on investment. I'll share a personal perspective here. I had the privilege of spending 11 years as the principal at North Oconee High School. During that time, we welcomed many students who transferred in from private schools. Parents were often surprised at the rigor and the expectations in our classroom. More than once, I heard them say, "But they came from private school. How can this be harder?" While there's certainly excellent private schools in Georgia, the broad assumption that private is better simply doesn't match my experience. In fact, often the opposite was true. One aspect on another issue that we need your help is building a coalition between government entities. One area where public schools spend a great deal of time is parent education. As a principal, teacher, and superintendent, a significant portion of my role as an educator has been just that, parent education. I think about it as a dad of young children. My wife's sitting in the audience probably saying this is true, but there was no instructional manual for raising kids. And as a dad of a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 3-year-old, we are doing the best that we can, but it is extremely challenging. We have entities inside the state of Georgia, other than public schools, who can help create partnerships to help our parents. The Georgia Department of Family and Children's Services and the Department of Community Health are two entities, in my opinion, that should and could build a coalition to help support parents across the state. When we refer or seek help from government agencies, we're seeing a troubling lack of consistency in what gets investigated and what does not get investigated in relation to a student's home life. Even more concerning is the absence of a proactive, preventative service that could support families before a crisis escalates. When government agencies are inconsistent or solely reactive, schools become the default safety net. Teachers and principals are left managing situations that extend far beyond the classroom with few and little resources or authority to intervene. As it relates to safety, behavioral threat assessment teams must continue to be adopted by school districts. We must develop these teams to help find solutions for our students and our families. Late last year, our RESA team brought in representatives from the University of Georgia student behavior team and student care and outreach to speak to superintendents about how we can develop a behavioral threat assessment team at each of our school districts to keep our students safe. There is power in building teams that communicate, look for solutions, develop partnerships, and have a list of resources available for students and families. I believe it is helpful for law enforcement partners to also receive mental health training and how to deal with kids in crisis. We need help from the private sector for more mental health treatment facilities. There are students, some within our district or districts around us, that have been denied 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 times. They've been denied beds at residential mental health treatment facilities. We have a large number of residential facilities across the state that will not accept students based on their diagnosis. That makes it extremely challenging for Georgia's public schools. I would also argue that social media is one of the leading contributors to the growing mental health crisis. The influence of social media has changed the way in which we operate. School administrators spend every week on an issue that arose on social media. As a principal, these issues take away a large amount of time to investigate and assign appropriate consequences. The social media companies, in my opinion, are not friends of educators. I've never experienced a time where they were willing to communicate with the school district over an incident. From bullying to threats to anonymous accounts, the time and energy spent on these issues is over the top. And where do the parents go to get the solution? They go to the public school to try to figure out. And it's left with public school administrators trying to figure out what's going on. These companies should be held accountable for being responsible for communicating with school officials at any time. Because I can tell you as a principal, those calls often didn't come at 9:30 on a Monday morning. They came at Friday night at 10:30 at night. They came on Saturday morning at 6 a.m. They come on Sunday afternoon at 7 p.m. when you're trying to get school ready for the next day. HB 340, the distraction-free bill, has been a move in the right direction. But there needs to be investigation into how regulations can be adopted to help schools be able to immediately communicate with a person at these social media companies. And in my opinion, it should be a person speaking with a person and not a person completing out a form to report an inappropriate post, hoping that it gets taken down in the next 2 or 3 days. So in conclusion, here's my request. Let's be very thoughtful and strategic before adding new requirements to Georgia's schools. Streamline requirements. Consider the examples raised by Barrow County and Dr. Allison about reducing duplicative or unnecessary mandates. Support public schools, not just with funding, but with your words and your laws. Trust the educators and leaders who are working tirelessly today for our kids. Look for ways that we can build coalitions across state agencies. And reject false comparisons. Let's end the narrative that private or charter schools are inherently better than public schools. Legislation and rhetoric often imply this, even if it isn't said outright. In closing, I ask that you believe in and trust Georgia's educators. We will stumble at times, but every day there are thousands and thousands of educators across our state, some of who are sitting in this room right now, who give everything that they have, every power, every piece of their being to make sure that our kids have what they need. Together with your partnership and your support, we can ensure that Georgia's public school system remains a foundation for strength for our communities and our economy. Thank you so much for giving me your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I know we have Michael, I think we have time for you. I did want to open it up before you started, since nobody, thankfully, has left of your team, Dr. LaDuff, in case there's some questions from the panel. Are there any members have any questions of any of our presenters from today? Not hearing any, so you ready? How much time do you need?
You tell me when to stop. Dr. Brown stepped on my line. I don't know what I'm doing either, so I can probably stop it.
Well, listen, I tell you what, I don't think any of us embarked on this without a desire to listen and to hear some of the stuff that might be tough for us to listen and hear about. And I think Mr. Walker is diving into some things that probably have been brought up, but are also things that I think he's seen over the years that he's, mentioned to us that, talking with you, Chairman Irwin, need to be addressed and are probably maybe somewhat overdue addressing, if that's fair to say. And I appreciate you taking the time to comb through this. Mr. Walker, I will stop you if we get long, but take all the time you need. This is important to us.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
And for those who I haven't had the chance to meet, let me introduce myself. My name is Michael Walker. I'm a Deputy Legislative Counsel from the Office of Legislative Counsel for the General Assembly. I've been with this office for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was a school board attorney for about 15 years and representing various metro area school districts, both as in-house counsel and in private practice. So during that time as a school board attorney of 15 years, I learned enough to be dangerous. As a lot of school board attorneys can attest to, you tend to become aware of the issues when they become problematic issues. So I've seen problems for school systems. I don't always see all the good things that school systems do, and so it's always great to come to events like this just to hear where there's been real success and where there's opportunities to improve. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our office, just in case if you're not familiar with it and you haven't heard about it, because it could also explain some of the limitations that we deal with in general and some that will have some application today. So I am here on behalf of the Legislative Counsel for the state of Georgia, Betsy Howerton. We're happy to be here. We are a strictly nonpartisan joint office of the General Assembly, and that means that we provide advice and counsel on legislative matters for both the Georgia Senate and the Georgia House of Representatives, and we provide advice and counsel to all members of the General Assembly with equal opportunity. So I, at any given time, conceivably have 236 different clients. And I might deal in one moment with a client from one chamber of one party, and then the very next moment be dealing with a client from the other chamber of the other party, and they want to talk about exactly the same thing from exactly different directions. And that's part of the things that I like about my job. But what it does mean is that we have to steer far clear of making policy suggestions. That's why the elected officials are under the Gold Dome. They are there representing their constituents. They are there advocating for policies. And what our office tries to do, and we do try mightily, is to craft legislation that serves their objectives. It gets some legislation that does what the elected officials want the legislation to do. So I'm going to talk about some things that are in the education code. I'm going to do my best to stay away from making any kind of policy recommendations. Again, that's getting outside of my lane. I very much don't want to do that. So I'm going to just talk about some areas perhaps where some clarification, some cleanup, some consistency might be brought to bear, and it could
Streamline.
Yeah, it
Yes,
could
sir.
streamline. The first subject, and these are the topics that I'm going to talk about, flexibility, some selected provisions, and then some defined terms. The first topic is flexibility, and I guess a good thing to say here is to tell you something that you already know. Georgia's a local control state, and we've already heard several different kind of expressions of that today, where we are making a lot of significant major decisions on how education is delivered in the state at the local level. Particularly for people who are newly initiated to the General Assembly, I will get questions from newly elected members saying, well, can we do it like they do in so-and-so state and such state? And the answer often is no. They have kind of top-down education systems where the state school board or the state superintendent or the governor can just say, this is what we're going to do and you have to do it. We can do that in some ways, but we do have significant constitutional limitations. The Constitution for the state of Georgia specifically provides that local school boards have responsibility for the operation and control of their local school systems. The General Assembly has a very important role to play there. They are the guiding hand. They provide the overall policy, but that bumps into local control on virtually every subject area that you can imagine. One area where we've been kind of operating in for the last 20 years or so is inflexibility. I brought some visual aids. I didn't bring them up here with, but over there's the big stack of the education code. It's 2 full volumes of the official code of Georgia annotated, constitutes Georgia's education code. And a very large chunk of that, almost 50% of the entire education code, is Chapter 2, elementary and secondary education. Major provisions in Chapter 2. The big one that everybody likes to talk about and has been talking about for about 4 decades is quality basic education. There's no shortage of discussions around QBE and what can be done to improve. I will preview. I'm not going to be talking about QBE today, so you don't have to worry about that. I am going to be focusing more on other parts from Chapter 2, and that's the increased flexibility for local school systems in Article 4 and the Charter Schools Act of 1998 in Article 31. The first one I referenced provides for strategic waiver school systems. The second provides for charter systems. And let me assure you, I'm going to give just a very kind of 30,000-foot overview of the flexibility models. My thinking here, Mr. Chairman, was that if part of the objective of this study committee is what can we do to streamline operations, it would be appropriate to at least kind of touch on what already exists in the law to allow the school systems to have the flexibility to do a little bit of slicing and dicing on their own, and it extends that concept of local control, being able to waive and get variances of various state laws in order to maximize their local strategies. This is a map of the state of Georgia just showing the breakdown. You can see the significant majority of school systems are what we would refer to as Swiss systems or strategic waiver school systems. A smaller number are in yellow on the map. They are the charter systems. Charter schools is a word that is a little bit difficult to pin down. We have lots of different kinds of charter schools, and now we have charter systems. The one thing that I always like to say, and it's probably the question I may be asked more than any other, is a charter school a public school? And the answer is undeniably, unequivocally, yes. Whether we're talking about a charter system, a local charter school, a startup charter school, a conversion charter school, a state charter school, a state chartered special school, they're all public schools. We do have one outlier, if you will. That might not be the best term. You can see there is one highlighted there in purple. We'll just leave that as a bonus if anyone can call out and figure out which school system is neither a charter system nor a Swiss system. We have one, and I won't mention them. If they're represented in the room, that's not meant in any kind of pejorative way. It's Beaufort City Schools, by the way. So we'll talk a little bit about charter schools. Georgia's been really a pretty early adopter of charter schools, and the Charter Schools Act of 1998 was our really kind of watershed legislation that provided for charter schools in the state. It was amended about 10 years after its original enactment in 2007 to allow for charter systems. So we originally allowed for individual charter schools. Now we allow for charter systems. This will be my first kind of comment, and again, since we don't recommend on policy, I'll just make comments. There's probably an opportunity here, Mr. Chairman, for the charter systems provisions to be peeled away from the Charter Schools Act of 1998 and perhaps be its own standalone provisions. The language in the Charter Schools Act of 1998, because it was originally adopted specific to schools, the charter systems kind of approach was overlaid on top of it, and there's not necessarily 100% applicability. if they were teased out some lines of separation, I think there could be some clarification there, just take away some undue confusion at the local level. For any who are not familiar with just some of the high-level descriptions of charter systems, it's just one of the two primary flexibility models in the state. It's really a broader model than the second model we'll discuss, which is the strategic waiver systems. These local school systems will enter into typically a 5-year charter contract with the State Board of Education. One of the defining characteristics is school-level governance teams that involve community, parents, and teachers in key decisions. Those are a required component of charter systems, whereas they are not a required component of the strategic waiver systems. Charter systems can take a pretty kind of a wide approach through Title 20 and the Education Code, deciding which provisions they want to hew to and where they want to deviate from what's in Title 20 in order to decide to deliver their educational programs and services in exchange for improving student outcomes. The next, yeah, please.
Laurie, how many charter systems do you have in Northeast Georgia recently? Three.
Okay. The strategic waiver systems is a newer term to a slightly older concept. So this concept's been around since the late aughts as well. For any of you who remember the IE Square schools, the strategic waiver system was essentially a redesignation for that program. So this program has also been around since around 2008. The renaming happened in 2015. And by then, every school system had to make that election. They were either going to be a charter system or a strategic waiver system, or they were going to stand pat and just say we're a no waivers Title 20 system, and that's why we have the one exception to the rule. Rather than having a charter that kind of allows for broader flexibility, the strategic waiver systems can identify specific provisions in Title 20, specific provisions from State Board of Education rules, and other controlling authorities that they want to waive in exchange for improved student outcomes. So they would, and I think I've got an example here. I'll go ahead and shoot to the example and then we'll come back. For a strategic waiver system, and this is just one portion, this when a school system enters into a strategic waiver contract with the state, they will attach to that contract and a comprehensive list of all of the provisions that they would like to waive. And then you can see this is just one page of one school's attachment. These attachments can be several pages long. So they can go through quite a bit of Title 20 and say, I want to waive this, I want to waive this. And they are required to articulate how the waiver is supposed to help, what it's going to do, and then they also articulate what the accountability measures are going to be and the consequences if they don't comply. So very broadly speaking, this is the approach that the state is taking in the last 20 years or so to give the local school systems more flexibility to adapt to the conditions on the ground. I'm going to back up and just say that that's not totally carte blanche. There are some provisions of law that just absolutely are not waivable, and this would apply to charter systems and to strategic waiver systems. And really this applied even before we had these flexibility systems where school systems could kind of do one-off waivers under special circumstances. It's always been, or for quite a while, has been Georgia's policy that we would not waive any federal, state, or local rules, regulations, court orders, or statutes relating to civil rights, insurance, and the protection of physical health and safety of our students, employees, and visitors at schools, and a couple of other bullet points there that you can read. That language there is kind of a guiding principle that governs our waiver approach in general. If you are going to seek a waiver that is at odds with this, that waiver is going to be, probably scrutinized just a little bit more. Conceivably, you could get rid of all of our specifically delineated waivers and just say, if it falls under this umbrella, you can't do it. But we haven't taken that approach. We've come to a place where we've started to articulate the particular areas that are just absolutely not amenable to waivers, or at least there's going to be some limitations on what waivers are going to be available. I will not read from the list, and I can make these materials available. And I'd like to refer back to my earlier comment about me not knowing what I'm doing. I welcome input from all of the professionals on the ground who are dealing with this day in and day out. I'd like to believe that I did a pretty thorough job of identifying these issues, but I would also very much welcome feedback from anybody who says, Michael, you got it wrong. And that's not just today, that's really any time. I always welcome input from the folks who are in the school system so that I can be as informed and as educated as I can be, so that when I am in the fortunate position of being able to provide advice to the members, I know the right answer. So please, that's kind of an open invitation. Please tell me what I'm doing wrong. This is a partial list of various legal requirements that cannot be waived. This is a list of what has happened a little bit more recently when new legislation has been coming through the General Assembly. There have been provisions kind of added to the end saying, this law, we really mean it. This one we're not going to let you waive. And so rather than just saying kind of a blanket prohibition against waivers somewhere else in the law, which is what we were dealing with here, with each one of individual pieces of legislation, for example, the divisive concepts legislation from 2 or 3 sessions ago, that had a provision that said this code section cannot be waived. And that's across the board. That would apply to charter systems, strategic waiver systems, and any other conceivable entity. Same goes for this other list, the rest of this list. And those were all that I could find in the code. So again, if anyone's aware of any others, please feel free to bring that to my attention. By and large, you know, these could fit in some form or fashion kind of in that general framework of the kinds of statutes that shouldn't be waived. They tend to touch on issues of student safety and health and well-being, staff well-being, families. That's just a kind of a policy approach that the General Assembly will want to take. Do they want to kind of have just more of a generalized description of the waivers that they want to make off limits, or do they want to be specific and express and say this can't be waived, this can't be waived, this can't be waived? I guess is just a general principle. At a certain point, you know, if you get too far down the road of identifying all the waivers that can't happen, then you've kind of turned around and swallowed your own rules. So that would be something, and I'm not suggesting that we're there at this point, but it's a place that you could get to. It's not uncommon for members pursuing legislation in the education field to want to include in their legislation. Make sure this one can't be waived. This one's really important. We can't waive this one. That happens a lot. Here we're back to the example of the waivers that can be requested and are requested by school systems. And I defer to the Department of Education. They're certainly aware of this. They make this information available online. You can go to any one of your local school systems and view either your charter contract or your strategic waiver contract, including all of the provisions that are waived. In fact, that's one of the first things that I do when I get calls from members kind of trying to work through constituent issues that are related to the schools. One of the first things I want to know is what waivers do they have, because that's going to dictate what laws they have to comply with. And that usually, very often, will inform the discussion quite a bit. So this is very valuable information. It takes different forms, but this is a fairly standard form of what it takes. I don't know if the Department of Education has run kind of reports of what are the most frequently requested waivers or the most frequently granted waivers, but I would imagine that that's probably fairly easy to do without committing Carrie and her folks to having to do that. I'm not aware of any kind of longitudinal reports that demonstrate that, you know, a waiver of this provision has resulted in this outcome. Again, that may exist, I'm just not aware of it. But the idea is we have enacted at the state level legislation, often tied to QBE funding, but not always. And this is a statement of the General Assembly's policy regarding education in the state of Georgia. And then we have allowed the locals to say, thanks, but no thanks. We'd like that to not apply to us because we think we can do it a little bit better, and that's the bargain that we're in currently. Okay, I will pause just in case I can answer any questions on flexibility. And again, that was just intended to be high level, just to kind of give you the idea of what the current kind of state of play is. I would characterize it as there is already a fair amount of flexibility that is available to the school systems, while absolutely recognizing that there are some areas that are off limits from waivers that I can only imagine do create challenges for them, in addition to the challenges that have already been articulated with some inconsistencies, maybe some outdated provisions that create some confusion. But those I would kind of put into a separate category. The waivers and the flexibility system is there to say, okay, tell us what you want to do, and if you can articulate a rationale for it, we're probably going to be okay with that. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. All right. I will do this one very quickly then. I have a few select provisions. Again, I can make the materials available. And this, I really do hope to hear that I'm wrong. These are particular provisions that I, when going through the code, looked through and at least had some question in my mind as to whether any of these provisions are still actively being applied or utilized, or if they have kind of gone fallow, if you will. Let's see, I think there might be, no, I went the wrong direction. Yeah, we've got just a handful, so I'll tick through them really quickly, and even if anyone wants to just speak up and say, no, that's wrong. The provision for salary scale adjustments and stipends for math and science teachers, that was enacted in 2009. I just have not heard of it being used. I could be wrong about that. Same for pay for, it's used, great, thank you. Pay for performance program rewarding group activities, that's been around for about 40 years, nearly 40 years. I hadn't heard of that one. Okay. What I can do, Mr. Chairman, is maybe I can touch base with, if you want me to, and this is another part of the explanation of our office. We work at the direction of individual members. So if you direct me to, Mr. Chairman, I can reach out to DOE, OPB. I can research these and come back to you and let you know which ones have not been used for a while.
That'd be great. They're going to be matter of record now that you've presented them, of course, or once you go through this list. And we'll have an opportunity. We have actually the ability to meet 2 more times.
Okay.
I know we have 1 more scheduled at least, so we'll be able to invite you back on some of these fronts as needed. So, and this is great work. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please, you may, I mean, 3 more minutes if you want to take them.
I'll forecast, and maybe there's some feedback can dictate whether I do a little more work in this direction. The final kind of subject that I was going to dive into was some defined terms that we use in the code. And what I would appreciate is kind of getting input from the folks on the ground and in the field, whether these defined terms present problems to them. From a drafting point of view, they're problematic because we've got some outdated terms and we've got some inconsistent terms. And those are enemies of legislative drafting. We want to make sure our terminology is up to date and consistent. So the difference between, and I think a couple of key ones that I'd really want to focus on, the differences between local school systems, local education agencies, and local units of administration, I think, are pretty critical. We use those terms in dozens and dozens of places throughout the code. I don't know that I would bet a lot of my own money that we use them with absolute kind of rigor and fidelity when we say what we mean and we mean what we say. So if nothing else, I would invite the opportunity to collaborate with other kind of involved and impacted agencies just to make sure that whenever we are using those terms, that's exactly the term that we mean to use.
Yes.
And the other one, it came up several times today, just in across the slides, and that's the last question at the bottom concerning school bus. We've got some old-fashioned terms kind of carry through the code. We still use pupil every now and again in the code, and we still refer to school districts in the code. Those are 2 obsolete terms that we're trying to kind of work out of the code. School bus is by no means an outdated, old-fashioned, obsolete term, but it is not comprehensive anymore. For a long time, student transportation services really were concerned with one mode of transportation, and that was school buses. As we have legislated and allowed for I'm going to get to the end, for vehicles other than school buses, we have left a lot of references throughout the code to just school buses. rather than recognizing that there are alternative vehicles that can be used. And that touches on personnel plans. It touches on liability issues. It potentially touches on immunity issues. So we have lots of laws that apply to school buses and school bus drivers that, at least under the black letter law of the official code of Georgia, does not necessarily reach to a school district employee who is driving a vehicle that is not a school bus. And that's probably an area, kind of a preemptive area, to just cut off some potential challenges before they really come to roost.
Only thing I know about riding the school bus, unlike when I was going to school and we rode every day, is it seems like fewer kids ride the bus nowadays.
Who hasn't seen the big bus with one student on it? And that was part of the issue. There was a lot of movement to say we need flexibility to operate smaller vehicles. And so that's happening, and school districts are doing that. I think this is an area where the code could catch up with the practices on the ground, just to make sure that there's not someone who's going to get stuck in a hole where the liability protections that apply to school bus drivers don't reach them, the insurance provisions don't reach them, perhaps some of the employment benefits don't reach them. I can't point to specific examples of that happening, but I don't think it's difficult to anticipate those might exist. So that was going to be the final issue that I talked about. Happy to give up the time, and if you want me to come back and flesh it out, or if there's feedback that I can kind of fold into that, I'm also happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank you, and I appreciate you understanding. We've tried to kind of tailor this for a couple of hours and want to be respectful of everybody's time, and this is, I think, great. Wouldn't you agree? And gives us something really to put our arms around, in addition to the feedback we're getting from the two systems so far that we've heard from. So thank you, Mr. Walker. I appreciate it. Did want to open it up for, the members of the committee, if anybody had any closing thoughts. I know we asked for questions already, but anybody have any
If I can,
comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
If I can. Dr. LaDuff, thank you. Thank you for your thoughtfulness in Barrow County, bringing the information before us and allowing us to be here. Laurie, thank you, Northeast Georgia, pulling everybody in here and what y'all do. Dr. Brown, thank you from Jackson County. We definitely are going to take the importance of looking at HB 268 some with the changes that y'all listed up there and what we can do. And I agree, all those are worth looking at and seeing if we can make a difference in those. Holt, I think that's something you and I can sit down and talk about pretty quick. The return to work, it's active. We're definitely having conversations. I left an education meeting this morning at Pioneer RESA. Return to work came up with those superintendents. Time restraints on counselors came up. I also wrote the leadership pipeline was top in their priority to us. They are very concerned with the ability, and they made the same comments y'all did about the fact that these new leaders are stepping in there and also having to go to school, and they're administering their first year without a lot of experience or background to play on. So we'll pay attention to that from our side. Dr. Brown, the continuous improvement talk that you talked about is something that in education we've got to talk more about. We try to put cuts of an F on certain folks, but when they went from a 0 to a 69, somebody's got to understand there's some good stuff going on in that classroom, in that school system, but they're still an F, and they're still getting the punishment as an F. And so good point from you. And then, of course, parents, what we can do with parents. So I appreciate that. I'm trying to tie all this together with the mandates that we're looking at and seeing what we can peel off to make these happen rather than just put more on the plate, as you said. So continuing the conversation with us, and that's those of us that are on the education committee, where we can be of some help to take that mandate off, but also not just put on to replace the one we took off. Then you still got counselors are too busy is kind of what I'm getting to. But thank you for your time today.
See anybody's hand is up. Representative
Yeah, I
Persinger,
just
yes,
wanna
sir.
thank Michael Walker. I don't know how he sleeps during session. It's incredible, the amount of work and the amount of change that happens in a bill. I mean, 268 was changing almost by the hour, especially toward the end. So again, thank you so much for your work. Thank you.
We'd be lost without you.
Yeah, you know, the code we deal with sometimes is so complicated. How about anybody, does anybody have any, you know, I know we have some agencies represented here. I hadn't had a chance necessarily to touch on all of y'all, and we'll have other opportunities. I do appreciate, appreciate everybody being here. I guess for the record, Courtney, Alex, along with Michael, thank you, you know, for all the work you've put in on working on this and getting us here. Obviously, y'all have been contributing for some time. Dr. LaDuff, Dr. Thompson, so grateful for all of your participation today. Thank you for the mug and the package here that you brought us. And before I close out, I know there are a number of superintendents here. I'm going to